Hello, everyone. A very warm good morning. We have amongst us one of the pioneers of Indian fashion, Mr. Rakesh Thakore. So, thank you so much for being here amongst us.
Thank you.
It has been a pleasure. And Why Fashion Matters started its journey way back in December 2009, 2020. And we've done 8 chapters so far. And I wanted that before the series sees its end, we get to do a talk with you because for me, it has been coming full circle. I'll go back down my memory lane way back in 2007 when I was a student of fashion. And I remember we were given this module to work on a brand thesis and case study. And at that time, not a lot of people in my batch sort of knew Abraham and Thakur. But when I actually saw the plethora of work, it was something which was known internationally, and a lot of people sort of did not know that a brand of such a stature existed. And when I did my study, I showed it to the people around. They were just dumbstruck because very rarely does it happen that through textures, through these beautiful Indian weaves, and through the honesty that is committed to Indian craftsmanship, you see them in an Indian garment. And when you see that unsaid, muted, understated, and very high skilled product, you know that there is a difference which is happening in the fashion industry. Fast forwarding to 2011, when I was actually going to Milan for my master, I took my Italian teacher to DLF Emporio, which is the luxury mall in New Delhi. She wanted to pick an original Indian textile piece for her mother back home in Italy. And I was very sure that I would take her to the store, which I resonated with. And so on the second floor, right behind the staircase, there's this beautiful small store which I went into. It was dimly lit, and you saw the products right there. The warmth of the black and white, the navy was immediately stark. And we picked up an Abraham and Thakur scarf, which was in silk, indigo, gray, and slate. And it was the still same packaging of beautifully crafted thick gramage paper with horizontal stripes, which are screen printed onto it, and the logo rightly sat in the center of it. And that is the memory I still carry, sir, today. It's been 10 years almost, and that is what I feel. And when I actually crossed paths with you in March, when I stepped into your store without any expectation of meeting you, it was so beautiful that I got to meet you and you agreed to do this talk with us. So today is the ninth edition, but at the same time, it is going to be the second last edition that we will do, and I'm happy that I could make this with you. So giving me this stature and opportunity is very heartfelt. So I
Thank you very
welcome
much.
you. And before what we've done in today's session, everybody, is we are sitting right here in the studio of Abraham and Thakur in Noida. And behind us, we have some beautiful pieces of the archive. So without further ado, we would go into the history through these amazing pieces that you see behind us. And we will talk about the history of the brand through the lens of these garments. Before we move on, sir, what is that one moment that you cherish in these 3 decades of this magnum opus that is Abraham and Thakur?
Well, to be honest, I think what was memorable was uh, the sari that we presented from our very first collection
Correct.
in 2010, which was actually picked up by the Victoria and Albert Museum in
Right.
London. And it's actually become part of the archival collection. So that makes us feel very, very humble, but it's also fantastic to be part of
Right, sir.
that.
It's so important. I think that Sari has sort of set in that mark and that milestone, which no other band sort of could ever overtake because it has set that precedent in the history of Indian fashion.
I think what for us it was terribly important because it was our very first
Mhm.
ramp show,
Right.
and we came from the knowledge and background of basically uh, our discipline of understanding is basically textiles, and ikat plays a very important part of our
True.
vocabulary as well. Every collection we do try to represent all the crafts that we work with and we
Hmm.
continue working with actually from
Right.
the very beginning. And prior to the show, technically, we've actually worked overseas
Hmm.
and building the brand, and it's not been easy. It's been a really
Absolutely.
it's actually been a journey which is really quite remarkable in terms of what we've been able to achieve. But I think it's also been very, very tough. It's you struggle right from the beginning. Actually, it's only when you come up, and then you come to a certain stage in your life and you understand what you're doing and why you're doing it, and
Absolutely.
that's terribly important for everyone. I think And equally, it was not easy at all, actually, because, schlepping suitcases from store to store, meeting buyers, fixing appointments, sitting here in New Delhi and trying to make up, the journey through. It was been a great struggle. But once we started showing in showrooms in London, actually, Conran Shop was the very first buyer,
Cool.
and we managed to actually present a collection which they've actually bought. And importantly for us, it was actually the brand. It was not something being manufactured in India and made in India label on it. It was the brand which we were very, very firm right from the very beginning, that we insisted that we actually get known for the brand, because it comes under designer brand, actually, Abraham Thakore. So that's how we evolved, actually, with the understanding with all our buyers that if you're going to buy from us, it has got to do with the brand. You're buying the brand, actually. And that's the presence that we began to have overseas. And then 2010, that we came into the domestic market, which was interesting for us, because at a point when Assam was the very first store that was
Right.
opening in Bombay, and they were very keen to carry up our stuff, but knowingly we weren't selling anywhere in India. It was only
Mhm.
overseas. So when Tina Italiani approached us, it is something that she'd seen at the Convent shop and said, if it's available there, why is it not available in India? And henceforth, this whole journey began with Assam, and then gradually moved on. And then we began to see a very important part of the journey was also the presence of being in India,
Mhm.
because we rooted here, we are part of Indian culture and the heritage that we share amongst all the products that we actually still continue working with. I think that's been an important part of our
True.
journey, actually, yeah. And today we can very happily say we've achieved it. But it's been a tough journey. It's been a tough journey, and through 2020, actually, through the pandemic, has been really quite tough for everyone. It's
Absolutely.
actually been really quite tough. It's not easy. But the main thing is that one has to be really very focused. One has to be very sort of inclined towards understanding what you're doing, whether it's a product, whether it's fashion, whether it's
Mhm.
textiles, and sustaining the craft, actually, because that is what you do. It's like sustaining a relationship. And for us, it's very important that we actually be able to actually sustain that relationship with the craft,
Mhm.
with the craftspeople, no matter which area of which village, remote village they're working out of. But it's very, very important for us to actually see the connection and
Right.
articulate the designs that we actually keep within. And also encouraging them, most importantly, from time to time, because even if you're working with single technique,
Mhm.
it's how do you grow from that? How do you see a different design, a different layout, a different texture, a different pattern that actually can be achieved? Because
Mhm.
my journey started much before Ibrahim Chakra was established,
Correct.
actually. I went into the whole a decade, in fact, of doing textiles for the festivals of India, which I think none of you probably know about. Some of your seniors or your faculty members would
Right.
have known at the time. These were in the 80s.
Right.
And that was phenomenal for me, actually, because that was the growing stage for India, and not only for India, for me as well, to understand it. Because it was actually covering the length and breadth of the country, to actually
Right.
visit every center of weaving, craft, whatever we could actually, wherever we could actually go to. And that was the beginning. And then soon after that, when we started as a brand, Abraham Thakur, the whole basis and the essence was basically working with the traditional techniques and textiles.
Mhm.
And so still continue working and boasting about it, but we still continue
But you
working with
believe in it, truly.
some of the weavers that I worked in the 80s. We still work with them.
Wow.
And it's quite extraordinary, because I think you built a relationship, you built an understanding in terms of design sensibility also, because what they do for us is very different from what they do for others, because they work with a number of other people as well. But I think everybody comes across with a language, with this style of their own. So
Mhm.
that's how do they articulate that language, or the idea that from a sketch, or from, you know, from a mood board that evolves into a final product, from fabric to actually into a garment.
Right.
And here we have a few examples from archival collections which represent uh, different techniques, but I've kept them very limited because of time and also because of the space. So we have one which we talk about, the bandhani, which is again a craft that we work with. It's a resist technique, which is a fabric resist technique, and which is again from our Gujarat collection, because the whole collection was based, which is the second collection that we presented. or the third, I think. I forgot it, sorry. Anyway, so this is the barney, and then we sort of just, the the tie, which is basically the front, which is part of every woman's and a man's garment, which is the kedia top. So this is a long version of the kedia, and then we've done the yoke, which is quilted and attached to this in silk. So this is a fairly good example of that kind of thing.
And obviously, it's in your signature color of black and white.
Well, black and white has always been a very strong color palette of Abraham Thakure's, actually, from the very beginning. Even before our fashion shows, we've actually always been influenced by black and white, because we think the clarity that comes across through black and white, because the purity of white and the density of the black is actually gives you volumes of depth, in fact. So that becomes a very standard signature color palette of ours. Looking at a collection that we based from which is more of the natural fabrics, which is airy silks. And here we've incorporated the ikat pattern only in the pallu. So we got a double ikat pattern here, but it's very difficult to do ikat with tussa as a yarn. So we've kept the warp as mulberry silk, we've kept the weft as tussa, and the double ikat that comes into the pallu is actually mulberry silk by mulberry silk. So that's how we get the clarity. We get the clarity of the double ikat. It's a fine example for what it is. And also actually because it also encourages the weaver to work with different yarns from a different area of, where the yarns are, which is basically from, the yarn is from Assam. And here the ikat is being woven in Andhra. So making a collaboration of fabric and technique.
It's really beautiful.
If you look at this, basically it's a very fine jamdani from Bengal, which was from the collection that we did called Back to Work. And that represented something that we got to do with handlooms and textures that were like that you could actually wear handlooms, because everybody is looking at synthetic fabrics or man-made fabrics that actually you could wear to work. But here we were looking at something that you could actually pick up from your wardrobes and go to work in, which is really the very superfine hand-woven cottons. And jamdani is a technique well known in Bengal and which is in Pulia. So that was a woman's garment. Of course, there are layers over which she wears this, which is styled for the show. But here particularly, I just want to show you the fineness of the fabric and the lightness of it, actually.
And it's finished so beautifully from
That's
inside.
edged on the reverse side, which is really in a block printer technique. So basically, a combination of techniques, which is hand block printing and hand weaving. Again, you're looking at a sustainable process of weaving and printing, which continues even today, which is extraordinary, actually, because we have that wealth of techniques that are still available, and they're alive, actually. We have to keep them alive. That we keep on sustaining them, because that's what the emphasis is. And finally, another example from the first collection, which is the younger car. It was a man's garment, which was converted to a women's garment. But this is similar to the Houndstooth sari. The Houndstooth sari was produced in a double ikat, which is getting in lime and black and white. And we converted the Houndstooth pattern as fabric, which was then translated into garments. And I think that comes across quite well. So you have the borders, which is woven within the fabric and not attached to the silk. So it's actually structured on the loom. So what comes off the loom, then you actually begin to plan designing the garment accordingly. And that's terribly important, actually. And the sari, as everybody knows, is also structured on the looms. It consists of the ground, the border, and the pallu, and how actually each element, all these three elements work, the softness and the drape of the sari, how it helps, actually. There we are. So a little bit of what we have done in the past, we can carry on.
So you yourself have been a weaver. You love to weave on your own. You understand the nuance of it. How did that change the way you sort of look into the garments or you see a piece of fabric?
I think it's been very important because your background, actually being a student of the NID, which is textiles, was my, my what do you call it, actually? Textiles was my area of interest,
Right.
to be honest, actually. And I grew from there, and we were actually made to weave. And I think that's hands-on taught us so much, because what you do with your hands automatically affects your mind, and that itself you take forward. So that was my strength actually.
Mhm.
Even today, I can actually, because without the knowledge of certain techniques and understanding of how those things are woven, you cannot take your design vocabulary further, because till you can understand the technique, till you understand the drawbacks and the the parts of each and every technique, you cannot. Because how do you communicate to the weaver? How do he understands what you're talking about? You may give a beautiful design or on paper or a sketch, but how do you relate to him? How do you tell him in terms of texture, what kind of yarn to use, what kind of scale of pattern? All that actually includes this whole process of learning. And that comes from the background in which you as students now actually are in your foundation, in your final year, whatever it is, that is what you are taught. And that is
Mhm.
basically what you carry forward. And no matter which field you work in, whether it's fashion or textiles, it's terribly important to understand, because that's your backbone and that teaches you so much, because that's your wealth of knowledge that you take forward and move on in life. So that helped me greatly actually,
True.
because understanding textiles, and as I said, that decade of working with weavers and printers and in different techniques, whether it's in Benares brocades or it was Himruk or whether it was the block prints from Rajasthan, which is Jaipur or Bagru, Sanganer, these all areas, and what sees and what actually how do you participate in this whole process of design. That's terribly important actually. With the knowledge that you have, how do you actually communicate that to another person? Because the craft is very traditional in many ways.
Mhm.
Actually, when you go there and you find out that this is what they've been doing and they like to sustain that because that they're comfortable doing that, they do not like somebody else's vision. When you go in with a new idea, there's freshness, there's newness to it. And once they begin to appreciate that, because then they see that that kind of product does have more volume to it. Now, when I say volume, it means more business that brings is brought to them, and that's what they appreciate from you as an individual or as a group or as a company that comes and works with them, or goes into the field and works with them. That's really important, because craft documentation is also equally important. Do
Right.
the craft documentation while you're a student. It gives you the feel of what you're doing or what the craft is about, the knowledge, the finesse of it. How do they actually do it? What kind of background do they come from? These are all things that you actually articulate during the whole process of your documentation, because these are short-term projects. When you come into your final project, it's something that you take on and you see what
Mhm.
you want to deal with. What is that? Because you question yourself by then, because earlier it's always what you need to do, what you're asked to do as a student. But when you come in as a finally a student, it's something what you want to do. And that's how you put in all the years of knowledge that you've actually gained into that 6 month uh, project, right? And that's very
Right.
important actually for every student when you go through that process of learning, because that is your wealth of knowledge that you take out.
Truly said. I was actually in Bhuj in 2014, and I happened to go to a very far off indigo dye maker, and he showed me some samples which were actually, and he knew your name. He said that this is only exclusively for Abraham and Thakur. यहाँ पे केवल Abraham and Thakur बनता है, and that was something which just registered in my mind, and it was only that beautiful sea of indigos that you could see.
Well, thank you. But I think what's important, what Vastal is trying to say here is that, when we began, we were the only ones.
Right.
I mean, there were few individuals. I mean, I'm not being sort of this thing about arrogant about saying we were the only ones.
Mhm.
We were amongst a few people that were actually wandering around these areas. As a student of the NID, when I went down to the south and I was learning the technique of ikat, and I took that knowledge of learning how to, but I had to physically learn how to do it before I actually began.
Very
Because
well.
I took that from Nalgonda district all across to Warangal district, which is famous for dari weaving. So that was the project I did was basically the dari weaving of Warangal, but with weft ikat, because dari is all weft faced fabrics. So it's weft ikat. So that was an introduction. So that was my whole diploma project. But that came about when I was sent off to again to Andhra Pradesh to do a craft documentation on the Telia Rumals of Chirala.
Mhm.
And mind you, it was not easy. You don't speak the language, you don't know where you're going. It was very tough those days, actually, as a student. So I bussed it, and I went across there, met the weavers, spent time there. It was just about for a week, but that week seemed endless because the amount of knowledge you began to get from what you want to inquire about. And your mind has to be quite active. You have to be constantly questioning why this and why that, because that's what design is about. Why would you produce a plastic bottle against a glass bottle? You question your mind because that's what you achieve at the end of it. So when you go into a stage of understanding the whole technique and then learning the technique and then developing a product that actually is so different from what the weavers of Warangal were doing at that point, and that and then being associated with all these weavers at that point during the Vishwakarma exhibition experiments, uh, that gave me the knowledge of areas. This thing. So when we began, it was easy for us to move to the area because we already had a contact. That is terribly important. How do you develop that contact? Even that little amount of work that you do for an exhibition, then how do you actually continue that for the future? And that's very important actually to build that and sustain that.
Very
That's
true.
what we talk about actually constantly. It's whatever you do, how do you sustain it? How do you sustain for a living? How do you sustain the craft? It all matters actually. Though think on one hand, I also think that sustainability has become a very fashionable word at the moment. Everybody
Right.
carries it like it's a heavy weight or a heavy duty word. But I think actually, if you begin to understand the essence of it, is very important and very simple actually. How do you sustain it, and how you can sustain that with just being incredible with the crafts that you actually deal with, and you continue giving them work.
So you also give a lot of importance to the evolution of color in your palettes. So you use them to their fullest capacity and entirety. How and why, like how do you go about choosing that color for a particular collection? But it is given its due diligence through the exploration of various weaves.
I think color plays a very important part. Though, of course, we are known for the brand is known for black and white,
Right.
which is a very strong sort of signature color
Mm-hmm.
palette that we use continuously. But colors are very important for us as for everybody, in fact. So initially, our color palettes used to be based on spring, summer, and autumn, winter. But of course, now this is non-seasonal, so
Mm-hmm.
there are colors throughout these things. How do you blend colors of the previous season into the coming season? And that's an important process actually, because what are the colors, what is, but also colors that what influence you, what you actually is, what colors inspire you, what do you see when you're traveling, or what do you see on the streets on a daily basis. Also, it could be something from the fruit or vegetable
Right.
stalls, because those are colors that are really all natural and nature bound also, because those actually inspire you for many ways. When you cut a watermelon, what you get out of it, the egg of a peacock is white, but when peacock blooms, it's got colors. So it's things like that actually that inspire. Then the whole palette of whites or ivories that you have, the white of the August moon, the white of the sea of the surf, things like that. So they all have the jasmine flower, things like that. The whites of the summer actually. So that's very important, but also equally color plays a very important part of our collections, because that's very
True.
important, because everybody wants color. I think everybody wants to be associated with color, to be seen with color. But we find our success has always been black and white, in spite of having said
But you've
colors.
stood with that for last 30 years.
We have actually, and we've actually made it into a very strong in our minds. It's stuck in our minds that black and white is very strong for us. But I think every season we play with a lot of colors, and colors could be from anywhere, that really influence you on a daily basis.
So what is next for Abraham and Thakur? It's been 30 years. What's next? And of course, the pandemic has played a huge role in changing the way we think. So what comes next?
For us, I think it's always been challenging. It's always been uh, what we question, what we're going to do next. So it's always we start thinking about it even before
Mhm.
we arrive at that stage. So because of the pandemic, everything has slowed down. But in spite of that, never give up. Never give up hope. Never give up on your dreams. You just keep on aspiring to do what you want to do. Inspire yourself and inspire others that you are around you. And having said
Beautiful.
that, I think it's actually got to be very important. Actually, is keeping in mind what you actually want to achieve. How do you take this forward? Because this is a time for everyone globally, which everything is slowed down. economically, everything. I mean, the businesses, some have collapsed, some have shut down. But it's very unfortunate what people have gone through, actually, because
Yes.
it's being trying, it's being uh, exhausting for a lot of people. How do you deal with it? It's like an emotion. How do you actually deal with that emotion? It's basically a virus that has controlled our lives, or taken over our lives. How do we actually begin to actually see a future after that? What is the future for everybody? Everybody has a future, wants to know what, when, how, what's going to happen. So we as a brand, we actually looking at a lot of projects that have actually come out onto our plate, and which is exciting. Some of them very new, and which we're going to take forward. And I think that's what keeps us going. That's what keeps us
Right.
motivated, actually.
Last question from me, and before I move to my two colleagues who are waiting, why does fashion matter to you?
I think fashion matters to everyone, not only to me. I think everybody, every girl aspires to look different, put on a garment and look different, feel different. It's a feel good factor for me. It matters to me because if it's got to do with the season, of course. If it's summer, it's terrible because a man only is limited with a shirt and a pair of jeans or cotton pants or chinos, whatever it is. Very limiting. If you're, of course, traveling, you've got shorts and you got t-shirts or whatever you're comfortable wearing in. But for women, I think it's terribly important. Always that urge, they're waiting to get out, step out, and buy something new that makes them feel happy. It's like, a journey that when you go into the malls, whether it's for a day or for a couple of hours, it's like a retail therapy.
Mhm.
So I think everybody goes through that. It's not, you know, that you don't want it. I think everybody needs it and everybody wants it.
That's
When you
true.
see something on the ramp or you see it in one of those glossy magazines, everybody aspires to look like them. Everybody wants that. And now coming to the aspirations of, when you see a size zero or size eight model walking the ramp or strutting out a beautiful garment. And it's terribly important for a large person also to feel comfortable in what they see on the ramp. And I think that is very well articulated now. And that's the coming of, you know, into the future where everybody is to be kept happy or pleased about what they are, which is, in whatever frame of mind shape they are in. I think it's terribly important. You cannot see somebody suffering because, it's not what they want, what others want them to be seen as. It's got to be what you are about and how you feel about yourself. And that's a terribly important part of your life as well as a student is what you are, what you want to do in future, and how do you see yourself growing also, whether it's a small business, whether it's a large business, whatever it is. Stick to small business is always safer. Large businesses grow, they're out of control. With small business, and we've actually been able to sustain our small business with the lockdown situation and the pandemic, that we've actually been able to be small.
Which is very
And that actually
useful.
helps us terribly, actually, because uh, the wealth is also in handing fewer people. People work harder, you see better results, because otherwise it's always the more people that you have, it's always, we have a very Indian mentality, to be honest. Forgive me for bringing this up, but it's always actually because we always see hum kyun kare wo aur ko karne wala hai. You understand that? हम क्यों पानी लाएं वो है प्यून है पानी लाने के, you always depend on that. And I've seen, because it's not because of this thing, but in Japan it would never be there's somebody in the kitchen or in the canteen area actually waiting to be asked pani lana chai ka banana. It's never. It's somebody working within the team who gets up and makes a cup of tea or coffee, whatever it is, and serves it. And there's no this thing about it. There's no this thing, that maybe is such a liga and all that. What is the Hindi term they use for it? What is the Hindi term they use for it? It's below my dignity to do it. It's basically that it's not. It doesn't make you a smaller person in your mind or in your frame or anything. It's how you do it. How do you present yourself?
Right.
How do you actually, make people appreciate about what you are? I think that's very important. Every we talk about lives matter. I think everybody matters here. In your people working with you, the tailors, the karikars, whatever, lives matter as well. It's terribly important how you treat them, with what dignity you treat them, and I think that is a very important learning process of your
I think you've summed
life.
it up really well, because that's where the fashion is headed. It is the significance of making that difference in today's
Yeah.
time. So my two colleagues, Sneha and Latika, are right there. So Sneha is actually, she heads the fashion department at the Design Village. Is also a sustainable process, product, and concept designer. Sneha, over to you.
Nice to meet you, Sneha. Can you
Hi.
hear us?
Yes,
Now we can
yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. I would like to actually start with the double ikat houndstooth silk sari, because I've seen that, and I think a lot of people who have the background in textiles would understand as to how much technicality has gone into it. It's not just, hey, let me just weave something. I think it's beautiful, and I am from a textile background, and I know Vatsal keeps saying I actually, for me, fashion is just about expressing myself, but textiles is something that I believe in completely and truly. So I think my question would be, why, like, not why, like, how did you decide that you want to move from textiles to fashion? Although I can see in your work as well that textiles is the core for everything.
Thank you very much for the question. Is interesting because I think what you're trying to say here is basically why is it? Because I think both David and I come from a textile background, but David has actually moved forward into fashion. So the team here is basically textiles and fashion. Because I always put textiles before fashion because before the cloth you cannot create a piece of garment or this thing. For us, it's been an understanding that we've always done that. So we take our responsibilities very seriously in the process. From the time we start with the colors for the season, all the way into the techniques that we're going to be, including in the collection, all that whole process, we work together on it. And the final product is evolves from what we actually get from the weavers. And here, working with handloom weavers is not easy. So you have to understand that also it's all very time limiting. Because we have time bound. Fashion is time bound because what you see now is what you see. If it comes a season later, it's not worth it. So for us to get that whole bridge accepted by the weavers is very important to actually see that this is all time bound for us. So you have to give it to us because it takes us so many weeks to actually convert it into a garment. If it takes 45 days to weave a length of fabric, whatever it is, but also take because then we have to get it into the stores or whatever, ship it out, whatever it is. But coming to the houndstooth sari, it was actually uh, big from the first collection actually, and it was even before the what we did was the uh, masculine and feminine collection, which is actually most of the textures were derived from the men's collection for women's clothing, right? And so we took the houndstooth, which again was much before that collection. Houndstooth is a very geometric pattern. And that actually worked very well. And of course, as you say rightfully, that it really takes that. And here again, may I emphasize that we actually did only six saris that were produced. To get that one sari on the ramp, we had to get a warp length of six, five other saris. So total number for six, of which we know friends of ours have actually bought the remaining five. So we actually sitting on none because the one that we sat on or we had in our archival collection is now moved on to the Vienna archival collection, permanent collection. So that's the great achievement for us. Has actually been quite phenomenal actually to get that thing, and not only from that collection, from the next collection as well. We had another two garments that were selected that also gone into the archival collection. So that's pretty wonderful too. When you think about it, but actually we can't just live in that space. We have to move forward. We need to read because we're coming from a very creative background, and we really need to, move on because you can't just this thing. But is moving in on to moving on with your thinking process and equally encouraging your craftspeople that you deal with and work with on a regular basis. That's been our sort of fundamental sort of focus as such.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Sneha,
Thank
for
you
that.
so much. I just have to add that I think it requires an immense amount of trust that a craftsperson would have on you to actually go and sit on that loom and weave as well, because what they have been weaving also is a part of their identity. So, for them to expand that as well, it requires a lot of trust that they have. So I think, yeah, thank you so much.
Absolutely, you're very right. You're very right. I think it very, uh, gives you an assurity that they actually trust you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Sneha.
you.
now we have Latika. Latika she heads the operations and student admissions and the outreach program at the Design Village. And she has brought in breakthrough techniques of hers to make sure that the students come and experience design as a whole offering. So,
Nice to meet you.
Same here, sir. And it's such a pleasure hearing you. My question to you is very simple. You have a legacy, that comes with you. But the students of this generation, if I may say, because I'm quite old, they feel that design is fashion, it's Bollywood, it's garments, and they don't understand that how the journey to reach where you reach, of what you've achieved, how the journey and everyday learning in itself is so important. And I think none other person than you, because you come with that legacy, you've seen that you're doing it for Bollywood now. What would you like to tell our students to, so that they understand that it takes time and it takes efforts and energies and maybe a concentrated effort or something, that what would be your advice to the students of today?
I think it's a bit tough. We actually have never sort of done things for Bollywood. It's the glamour actually, because what actually a student sees as the glamour
True.
part of it, because they think the minute they graduate as a young fashion designer, they're really going to get into the world. Everything is going to fall into their plates. They're going to just be up there. It's not that. As I said right in the beginning, that's the journey that you begin with, which is really tough. It's really challenging at times because we came from India. We're actually trying to sell something that's Indian to us, what we mean, but it has that vocabulary which is international, that we've been able to sustain all these years around. And then we take it forward into a different country, into Europe as a market. And they actually absorbed it because they actually appreciated what we brought because it was so different for what they had seen that was coming from India. And I think coming back into this whole life of glamour, it's not an easy image at all. You have to achieve it stage by stage or step by step. It's like climbing a ladder. For everybody, actually, whether it's the young fashion designers, even those who are like Bollywood major stars now, they've actually come up through another sort of ladder and achieve what they are known to be today, actually. It's tough. It's tough for everyone in every field. So never think that, once you graduate, you get the star. You're never the star. You'll never be the star. You have to make sure that you are known as a star only when you actually achieve something. You start small, you achieve it, and then that's when you actually be able to say that I am what I am today because of the years that I've actually gone through the struggle. There's always a struggle. There's always a struggle behind every story. It's not easy for anyone.
True,
Some
sir.
can make it, some can't. And some really get lost in this whole thing because lost in the sense because they don't know what they're doing because they were actually participated in the whole vocabulary of Bollywood, of sort of fashion magazines, and they see these beautiful garments on this, and that's what they want to be known for. That one day there's somebody will be wearing their garment on that model will be wearing on that, whatever it is, and that's never going to happen. If it happens, fantastic. But there are thousands of people in the queue before you even get there. So you have to actually, in your own space, be creative, be truthful to yourself, be truthful to your vision, be truthful to what you want to do and achieve. And that's when you can be very humble about it. Absolutely. Do not be proud of what you are, whether it's your parents or your background, whatever it is. Come from very ordinary backgrounds. Actually, it's got to do with how hard you work, what you achieve, and what you want to achieve, and what you finally achieved. That's fulfilling, actually. If today we can sit and have a conversation, I think for us, that whole process or the journey has been fulfilling because we can actually say that we carry this baggage with us. Right. It's a baggage of knowledge. It's a baggage of struggle.
So true, sir.
There's much more to that, but it's not like you get photographed and you're glamorous and you're sort of, it's
Right.
not that. That comes much later in your life. I mean, you could be born a star, but if you can't prove yourself, please move. There's somebody else who needs that space. And there are thousands of people who need that space. Yeah, look at the young generation of designers. They're doing some fantastic, fabulous work in the field today. We never saw that try. And now that everybody wants to move into handlooms, everybody's moving, which is fantastic because they encourage the weavers, they encourage, them to do more creative work and more business for them. And I think that's what it is. That's the journey. That's the whole chapter of your life in terms of what you want to do.
That's so
Thank you.
beautifully put, sir. I'm sure I'm going to quote that when I'm speaking to the students next, because
Okay.
it's so important that it comes from you. You've seen it all. You've been there from that phase to where you are now. So thank you so much for that advice, and I'm sure our
Sure.
students are going to learn a lot from it. Thank you, sir.
I'm sure they are the right students.
This is the question. So we always ask, where do you draw a line between fashion and textile? Because it's so important that students understand that when you come to a school, a design school, you will just not learn how to make a garment. It is not about those mannequins that you see displayed in the alley. It is about understanding that process, understanding why that weave even exists. And
It's the
that is
knowledge
where,
of textiles, actually. It's the knowledge of textiles. And we come from a country which has great wealth of tradition, actually, which is all the textile techniques that we have. Some of the students are, one has to go through that also in terms of what are the different techniques and how important are each techniques in their own way. What do you achieve from this learning process of those
Right.
techniques? I think that's the thing. And we were very, very lucky that we had somebody, our faculty at the NID, who was actually a Finnish teacher. And she came in and taught us Indian textiles with the subjects.
look at
And it's extraordinary to just to consider that somebody from outside had to come and teach us Indian textiles about our own, techniques and textiles. And that was a learning stage in our lives also, because because she was such an amazing teacher, that what knowledge we gained from that whole thing was tremendous, actually. And I fell into this whole, the uh, experiments of the exhibitions, Vishwakarmas. And I thought that really grew me as a person, that, I evolved in terms of my learning or knowledge about textiles. That is where I actually can be very thankful.
right.
I didn't go there and say I'm from the NID and I'm a student of design and you do this and that. It never happened. I never let that happen, because you learn from them. You went with an open mind is actually to learn from them, is how they do it, what is the technique about, even if you were not aware of it, but that is the whole learning process. And that's a very important period of your time in your life, even as a student, what you learn from your faculty, what you learn on a daily basis. It's like cutting a vegetable, but how well you cut it, knowing how to cut it, what kind of knife you need to cut it with. It's very important. So it's basically the technicality of it. A weave. What is about the weave? What do you learn from that weave? What is the best that you can get out of that weave? How much further can you take this technique of the weave to? What else can you do? Change the yarn, change the texture, change everything, the design, the scale of it, a non-repeat, a small repeat, whatever it is. But that's what you want to give in into that final product. And that's important. Because without the knowledge of the skill, you can't do anything. And that's important, actually.
Thank you. So before we close, the student Divyani, who's right there, actually sent in a question for you. Speaking of struggles, so she wanted to know, how did you go? How were these initial struggles that you faced, and how did you sort of push those envelopes and came to where you are today? Because you mentioned a lot about learning from those struggles.
I think, Divyani, can you hear us?
She should be able to.
I think it's what's you learn from struggles. Struggles is it's part of your journey, because without struggles you cannot learn. Because everything that you are today or you want to achieve for a better tomorrow, you have to go through that through a struggle. It doesn't come easy for anybody, and I think the struggle teaches you a lot in the process, and that's what it's about.
Thank you so much for your time today, sir. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very
And
much.
for us, it's been extremely enriching because I finally got to create this.
It's just a chance moment when I happened to be at the store and he came in and he was trying to get my contact, and I just happened to be at the store, and that's how it's happened. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
We've
sir.
actually done it. It made me very nervous initially because I wasn't sure. Sorry about this. But I'm
It
so
has been an
glad we
honor
did
for
it. I'm
us.
so nice, and it's such a pleasure meeting all of you.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much, sir. Thank you.
How exciting. Yeah.
Thank you so
I
much,
hope the
everybody.
students have been excited about
I'm very
this
sure,
stuff
sir.
and learned
Very-
something out of this. Fantastic. That's the whole
Absolutely.
purpose of this, actually. Is that what you learn, I mean, it's somebody else's journey that you can learn from. And then the mistakes that one makes in this whole thing. We make terrible mistakes about everything. Sometimes, every day we make a mistake and we have to learn from the mistakes. And without making a mistake, we'll never learn. I think that's important, actually, is you learn from your mistakes.
Right.
Good things, good mistakes are fine, but the bad mistakes is what you actually have to consider and make sure that you don't repeat it. So that's what it is. You learn from mistakes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We
A
shall
pleasure
see
to
you
meet
all.
everyone.
Bye-bye, everybody. And
Virtually.
we will see you all on
Campus
3rd
on
of July.
Monday.
Yes, absolutely. See you all. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.